Okay, welcome everybody to this POLIS session, Boom and Bonanza, about active travel in times of COVID-19 that we are sure all in, and that's why we're here and not meeting in person. My name is Marianne Weinreich. I am market manager in Ramboll Smart Mobility, and I also chair the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. And I have the huge pleasure of introducing to you a great lineup of speakers today. But before I do that, there is some housekeeping rules that I would like to share with you. If hopefully you want to ask a question or chat or make a comment, you go to the chat and then session in the panel to the right. And there you can ask questions or make comments. To view who's attending this session, you go to people in the right corner and press there, and then session. If you want to maximize the screen, you can hide the chat or double click on the presentation of speaker. And after the session, if you want to try the networking function, you can do so on the left side, or you can visit the exhibition area. So be encouraged to do that. You can also, of course, join the conversation on social media and use the hashtag POLIS20. And so now I would like to just show an overview of the speakers here today. We have Jhon Warren from the European Cyclists'Federation. We have Laurent Mercat from Cycling Industries Europe. We have Fabian Ladda from Line. We have Jhon Alexander Ramirez Ospina from Nextbike. And then we will have a Q&A with all the speakers. So after each presentation, if there is one or two very specific questions to the presentation, more related to if something need to be clarified or something, I will take that, but I will save the more discussion questions for the Q&A at the end. So even though if your question is not asked in the beginning, there is room in the end. So with these words, I would like to introduce our first speaker. It is Jhon Warren from the European Cyclists'Federation. Jill is the CEO, and prior to this, she spent over 20 years with major international law firms and has also worked in the automotive, pharmaceutical, and publishing industries. Jill grew up near Chicago, but has lived and worked in Europe for over 30 years, including Germany, the UK, and Belgium. And her strong passion for cycling attracted her to ECF. She is an avid everyday cyclist and recreational cyclist who enjoys promoting cycling as a sustainable and healthy means of transport and leisure. And so with that, Jill, the screen is yours.
Okay, hopefully you can see me now, and I'm about to share my screen.
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. All of us know how challenging COVID has been and continues to be for Europe's and the world's cities this year. But as challenging and tragic as the pandemic is, it also presents a tremendous opportunity. It's prompted us to view many aspects of our daily lives through a different lens, and one thing we've taken a fresh look at, of course, is mobility. During the lockdowns, motorized mobility came to a near standstill. Quiet and empty streets ruled the day and gave us new perspectives, and also attracted longtime and new cyclists to the roads. What an opportunity. At ECF, we seized the moment to highlight how cycling could offer solutions both for the pandemic and beyond. And these include easing congestion, redesigning our streets, creating more livable and equitable cities, and making lasting positive change. There probably was never a better moment to be promoting cycling. The EU was making plans for its recovery and resilience facility and its next budget cycle. It was progressing plans for the European Green Deal, and it launched consultations to inform its sustainable and smart mobility strategy. The way we see it, there's no way to achieve the ambitious targets of the EU Green Deal or the sustainable and smart mobility strategy without lots more cycling. So we had to seize the moment to make sure cycling is an important part of these plans, budgets, and strategies. We were very glad to see that some cities were also seizing the moment for cycling with pop-up cycle paths, slow streets, incentives, and other measures. So to help inspire more cities to take action and promote cycling beyond the crisis, ECF issued a set of recommendations in May. We recommended that 95,000 kilometers of roads be repurposed for cycling, that cities reduce traffic speeds in built-up areas, that the EU establish a purchase subsidy scheme for e-bikes and cargo bikes, that cycle logistics should be used for much more delivery traffic, and that cycle tourism should receive economic assistance packages. As more and more cities and countries announced measures, we started tracking these developments systematically. On the one hand, to have a fuller picture of what was going on across Europe, but also to generate data and insights to help us advocate for more permanent solutions that would deliver lasting change. This is our COVID cycling measures tracker. It tracks COVID-related cycling improvements from across Europe that have been announced or implemented since March of this year. We've collected information from publicly available sources and from our member organizations, fact-checked the data, and entered it into a tracker where we can organize and view the information in different ways. So what exactly have we been tracking? Well, firstly, infrastructure measures, so kilometers of cycle lanes, traffic calming and reduction measures, whether slow streets or reduced speed limits, car-free areas, wider sidewalks. We've also tracked fiscal measures and subsidies like vouchers or other subsidies for purchase and repair of bikes, and cycle-to-work incentives, and also other evidence such as money earmarked for campaigns to promote cycling. And the key numbers you see across the top there, 2,323 kilometers of infrastructure measures announced as of the end of November this year, 1,115 kilometers already implemented, and over 1 billion euros of budget allocated to COVID-related cycling improvements. And we can drill down to see these statistics in different ways. So, for example, we can see here the progression of infrastructure measures over time. We can see the breakdown of these measures into cycle lanes, traffic calming and traffic reduction measures, car-free sections or wider sidewalks. And there's some other headline statistics across the bottom. So 37 out of the 94 biggest EU cities have announced or implemented COVID cycling measures this year. 40 out of 89 metropolitan cities in wider geographical Europe have announced or implemented COVID measures. And 17 out of 47 European capitals have done so. There's also an interactive cities map. On this view, the size of the bubble reflects the volume of measures, and you can drill down to see the exact numbers for a particular city. The tracker also has leaderboards. This one shows the standout cities and countries by measures. Some of the standouts include, for example, in Italy, Rome has announced 150 kilometers of cycle lanes. Bologna has announced 94 kilometers of cycle lanes. Turin has announced 80 kilometers of traffic calming and reduction measures. In Spain, we have a couple of standout cities. Granada has announced 60 kilometers of traffic calming or reduction measures. Barcelona, 21 kilometers of cycle lanes, 12 kilometers of traffic and calming reduction measures. Elsewhere, we see the Swiss canton of Vaud announcing 100 kilometers of cycle lanes, Lisbon with 76 kilometers, Paris, nearly 70 kilometers of COVID-related cycle lanes, Izmir, combination of 40 kilometers of cycle lanes and traffic calming measures, And Brussels, where I normally spend my time, 40 kilometers of cycle paths, 36.5 kilometers of traffic calming and reduction measures, and speed reductions as well. So also noteworthy, we see repair vouchers that were introduced in France and the UK, and purchase subsidies in Italy and Portugal. Our second leaderboard also shows what measures cities and countries are taking relative to their population size. And here the standouts are Finland, which is spending the most per capita on COVID cycling measures, and Luxembourg also scores very well in terms of the kilometers of infrastructure announced relative to their population size. By drilling into the interactive maps and charts, you can see our ratings. We have given provisional star ratings to cities and countries, taking into account the different kinds of measures, the announced plans and implementation progress, the total numbers, and the measures in relation to population size. So I invite everyone to explore the dashboard at ecf.com/dashboard to see how your favorite cities measure up. So how do we use this treasure trove of data in our advocacy work? So firstly, we share the data with journalists, academic researchers, the cycling industry, and policymakers, and we use it in our events. And there's been quite a lot of interest in it. We've been told it's the most comprehensive data set of such measures in Europe. It's been widely cited and tweeted by the media and by influential organizations, including POLIS. Thank you very much. Policymakers have also taken note, and it's great evidence, frankly, that Europe wants more cycling. Secondly, we and our members analyze and use the data in our advocacy work and communications. So for example, have the announced COVID cycling measures actually been implemented? What case studies or proofs of concept can we use to encourage similar measures elsewhere? Which cities or countries can be doing more? And what lobbying should we do to make temporary measures permanent? It's very good to see that our messages are being heard at the very top. We've been pushing for investments in cycling in the context of policy and funding instruments, such as the EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. Turning temporary COVID lanes into safe, high-quality, permanent cycling infrastructure is exactly the kind of shovel-ready project the Commission is looking to fund through the RRF. And as you've seen in the tracker, there are well over 2,000 kilometers of shovel-ready projects out there waiting to be funded and built. So we are making sure that the relevant stakeholders know that such investments are explicitly welcomed and how they can lobby their governments to make sure that such projects are included in their national recovery plans. We also draw on this data in our work in relation to other European policy and funding instruments. To sum up, it's all about working to make this scene you see here the new normal in our cities and towns to achieve a lasting green recovery in Europe. And we will continue doing all we can to help make more headlines like this a reality. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Jill. Really a fantastic presentation and very fantastic tool, the tracker. I check in regularly. It's fantastic to see. And thank you for sharing with us here today. And you'll be back for the Q&A in a little while. I'll see you later.
Okay.
Thank you, Jill. Okay, we are now ready for the next speaker. It is Laurent Mercat from Cycling Industries Europe and Smooth. Laurent is founder of the bike sharing company Smooth that operates in 23 cities, among others Moscow, Helsinki, and Paris. Laurent also chairs the bike sharing expert group at Cycling Industries Europe, which aim to gather the various bike sharing related companies dealing with equipment supply, daily operations, service supply, IT, and a push for bike sharing development. So welcome to you, Laurent. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. I'm very pleased to be here today with POLIS, explaining how we contributed to a certain extent to the period of COVID. I will basically focus right now, if you can see my screen, is it okay? So as you explained, as a smooth funder, we thrive with different companies coming from the bike sharing business to emphasize on a simple message that bike share scheme are very much participating to the bike practice boom that we have right now, and that any cities above 50,000 inhabitants, for example, in Europe, could have the benefit of bike share project. This is a very important message because we are totally convinced that bike share is a booster of bicycle practice. So who are the members of Cycling Industry Europe, CIE, right now? It's leading European bike share operators, suppliers, companies working on IT as well around bike share, helping the development of different projects in European cities. So we have us, obviously Smooth, but we have as well Nextbike, that is a European leader in Germany and Poland. We have Movencia, with whom we are operating a project in Helsinki, Finland, or the Canadian company PBSC, and many others. So gathering all together is very important to share ideas, to participate, and obviously to help this project to be well funded. So bike sharing is, to a certain extent, a fairly new activities for the last 15 years. It emerged in 2005 with the boom of advertising financing bike share at the beginning with the companies such as JC Deco or Clear Channel. Then the integration in public transport was a key issue of the development. So most of the bike share left the advertising business model to be fully integrated with public transport such as metro, tramway, buses, and others, and as well car sharing. Then we had, starting 2017, a real boom on free floating. All these bicycle originally coming from China, such as Ofo, Mobike, blah, 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 coming in a easy way without any station, but suffering from a business model that was not very much set up. To a certain extent, many of these companies disappeared due to this unstable business model, and some are still there, hopefully. But it changed a bit the way cities view bike share, at this system we're offering a system without any funding to a certain extent. So in terms of coverage of bike sharing project in Europe, you can see all these green dots that are projects that were and are still operating in different countries, with the little red dots presenting the project that stopped. So it's more than 820 projects that are still active, representing a fleet of more than 250,000 bicycles used every day in a sharing mode. So it's quite important in Europe and quite well spread. If we look at the major project, the one I would say above a fleet of 300 bicycles or 250 bicycles, they are focusing on the major cities and representing 80% of the fleet of bike share in Europe, and 90% of the usages right now. So in general, bike share is more used in cities that are more dense and more populated. I will just make a zoom on my country, France, and especially sharing with you some data that are brought by an independent company, a French company called Fluctuo, that is gathering a lot of information on different sharing systems. So we see here on the map, on the French map, the number of shared projects covering bicycle, but not only bicycle, e-scooters, mopeds, and car sharing as well. And this survey is covering 40 cities and with very recent data on the COVID period. So just showing that bicycle, which, so this chart is explaining the fleet, the number of vehicles that we have in the cities that we surveyed. So the blue are the larger cities, and in fact, Paris and surrounding. The yellow are cities above 200,000 inhabitants, and the gray one is between 100 and 100 inhabitants. So we can see that the fleet size in France, more particularly, which was France was an historic player in bike share, is reaching 40,000 bicycles, when the scooters right now, and we're speaking about last month, the scooters are around 17,000, 18,000, when other modes are a bit less, and especially free-floating bicycle, which didn't disappear by itself, but are not representing the major fleet, as well as moped scooters. In terms of level of equipment, so comparing the fleet with the population of these cities, this is presenting the density of equipment per 10,000 inhabitants. So we have in bike a quite good level of equipment, especially for the blue line, which is on the left, which represents Paris, where Paris is one of the most equipped cities in Europe, having 75 bicycles per 10,000 inhabitants, which is 7.5 per 1,000, which is quite important. While in comparison with smaller cities, the level of equipment is about 20 to 30 bicycles per 10,000 inhabitants, which is fairly the same as e-scooters, and obviously much less for car sharing and moped sharing. If we are looking at the daily usages, and I emphasize during the COVID period, so which is already a focus on our subject, the total of daily trip that we counted in France for this project was more than 8 million trips a day for the city covered with bicycle, and especially station-based city bicycle scheme, while, for example, e-scooters were covering 140,000. So obviously, bicycles are representing from far the highest number of trips made by sharing project, and this is very important. Very, very important. The coverage and the importance of bicycle is an obvious matter. And what's important as well is that bike sharing, and especially in Paris, for example, represent between 20 and 25% of the bicycle that you can see in the picture just before, on the pictures of people using their bike in the capital city of France. So this is quite important as a booster of bicycle practice. If we come with the last chart, which is the daily trip per vehicle, we see as well that bike is the most used vehicle, and we have in Paris more than 9 trips per bicycle and per day, which is very important, which is reaching sometime 15 usage per e-bike per day, which is very, very important, while the e-scooters are usually between 2 and 5, according to the city size, and similarly to moped sharing. So bike sharing usages are very, very high, and this is a very important issue for getting more user, getting more impact, more kilometers. We are still doing, and I speak about yesterday, 120,000 trips per day in Paris and surrounding, which is about 450,000 kilometers a day, just emphasizing on the importance of bike share, especially during this COVID period. And we help with CIE to promote bike share as a fast-track recovery for our economy, but as well on the change that we are all pushing for getting more share on bicycle practices. So we have different campaigns, Directly Smooth, relaying the Cycling Industry Europe campaign, but as well in connection with ECF to push the funding of the bike sharing project and to help this scheme to get sustainability using like more subsidies coming from the state government and from the cities to sustain this bike sharing project. Because when we have especially in the COVID period, more usage for many projects. We have more cost, and we have more impact, obviously, but we have more cost because we have to cover a very huge of this project that are increasing our cost. And in some of the business model that we have, our subsidies are more or less flat, linked to the capacities and not to the usage, which is, I wouldn't say a mistake, but the fact that the tenders were done that way. And what the history of these last recent years was popping up is that the bike sharing pushed by the free-floating system, where only user income are financing the system, was not helping this project to be sustainable. So we are emphasizing very much that bike share should be subsidized in an intelligent and smart way, pushing for nice business model to cover the very positive externalities of bike share, and this is important to sustain the industry. So just going back again to the message that Tony Grimaldi, president of CIE, was pushing, we need more bike sharing projects in any city that have a population of more than 50,000 inhabitants, which is more or less the threshold where bike sharing can get very good result, and especially the densely populated area. So this is very important, and we hope that the COVID period will push for infrastructure for sure, because this is a key reason for success, not only on bike share, but of increasing the bike practices. But along with that, bike sharing projects should be funded through this post-COVID recovery plan. So any cities that is listening to this pitch should understand that the local government, through the recovery plan, can push bike sharing project to be partially funded by this recovery plan. Thank you very much. This is all for my presentation, and I will be happy to answer any question that you can have.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for this great presentation. And we'll get back to you in the Q&A later as well. So
with
thank
pleasure.
you very much. See you later.
Good.
And now I have the pleasure of introducing Fabian Ladda. Fabian Ladda is based in Berlin and is leading public policy for Lime in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and at EU level. He was one of the first Lime employees in Germany and has launched over 40,000 e-scooters and e-bikes in more than 30 cities. He has been fighting private car ownership since 2015 and is using micromobility himself daily for the first and last mile. Before Lime, he worked at Uber and brought the first jump bike to Europe. So welcome to you also, Fabian, and the screen is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen. Great. Yeah, nice. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Fabian Ladda. I work for Lime, the largest micromobility operator in the world. I will show you how micromobility can get communities moving past COVID-19. Quick side note, when I talk about micromobility, I mean primarily e-scooters, but Lime also offers e-bikes since the summer. Reason number one why e-scooters and bikes will get communities moving in a post-COVID world is because they have reached critical mass. NACTO, the coalition of the departments of transportation in North American cities, shows that shared micromobility has grown over 400x in the past 10 years, and scooters have accelerated this growth. This graph shows that bike sharing has seen a good adoption rate from 2010 to 2017, yet in 2018 we welcome e-scooters to the stage and the adoption rate goes through the roof. People across the world are using our services and Europeans are leading the way. Every new city we launched reached 1 million e-scooter rides earlier than the one before. And last summer, Berlin set the world record and reached more than 1 million Lime rides in just 11 weeks. There are currently around 750 dockless micromobility systems in Europe. More than half of them are scooter-based. And Lime riders surpassed 200 million rides on our vehicles in October 2020, making Lime the first and fastest new mobility company to reach this milestone. This milestone is a testament to the undeniable popularity of shared electric vehicles and the massive amounts of latent demand still to be untapped. But then came COVID. And while the virus hit us very hard, the data we see since the outbreak is very encouraging. It looks like micromobility has emerged stronger than before, especially among local communities. The explanation is pretty straightforward. Scooters and e-bikes satisfy the need and desire for safe, socially distant, open-air travel. COVID has also helped change the negative perception many people and city officials had about scooters. For a very long time, scooters were seen as the McDonald's of mobility, while bikes were seen much more favorable. Fortunately, this has started to change. Great Britain legalized scooters a year earlier than planned to provide its citizens with a socially distant travel option that can replace short car trips. New York City has also recently legalized e-scooters. And I really like this quote from one of the New York councilmen who said that e-scooters couldn't come at a better time, and that the world is recognizing that we have a new alternative mode of transportation. For essential workers especially, they're going to feel more comfortable now. And for context, many cities across the US had categorized Lime and other operators as essential services and asked us to keep operating and increase fleet sizes. The mayor of Rome also encouraged environmentally friendly micromobility and authorized 8 companies, including Lime, to operate 6,000 scooters with the option to scale up to 16,000 scooters if certain requirements are met. And the list goes on and on with major cities in Europe embracing micromobility. And our riders saw it the same way. Both charts here are looking at 9 cities in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. On the first chart, you see that Lime has grown tremendously since June 2019. And as of March 2020, we saw a lockdown and travel restrictions due to COVID. Ridership slowed for a bit, but then continued its upwards trajectory. The second chart shows that Lime has seen more ridership in August 2020 during COVID compared to August last year. What I find most interesting about the second bar is that the tourist share went down to 5 to 10% depending on the city. This means micromobility is used by local communities to get around town. And the broad adoption rate is also shown geographically. This heat map of Berlin shows you where scooters were used back in June 2019 on the left side. And on the right side, you see June 2020. It becomes clear that usage is up in all districts, especially those that are rarely visited by tourists. So the big question is, how will our communities move post-COVID-19? As it stands now, many predict a Carmageddon. Nearly 1/3 of people without a car intend to buy one in 2021. Millennials seem to be especially prone to buy cars. And a quick reminder here, millennials are born between 1981 and 1996, so we talk about the ages 23 to 38. The good news is micromobility can help prevent Carmageddon. We survey our riders twice a year in Germany, and after 18 months, the average age is 38 years. By the way, 25% of our customers are 45 years or older, a number I like to share because people believe we have a much younger audience. But not only do our riders cover a large proportion of those that intend to buy cars in 2021, something we all want to prevent, it is also how they use micromobility, which is encouraging. A study from Bavaria showed that up to 33% of all rides complement public transit. And 2 studies showed that 21% and up to 33% of all scooter rides replace a car trip, that is a private car, car sharing, ride hailing, or pooling. What is even more encouraging, our own research shows that micromobility will become even more important after COVID. We conducted a survey of the general public to understand perceptions of travel before, during, and after COVID. We all know that public transit took a big hit during COVID peak, as you can see on the lower bar diagram, but our respondents expect to return to normal travel patterns in transit once COVID is over. When it comes to micromobility though, we see a substantial increase in use, with nearly 75% of all respondents saying that they plan to use our services. We did a similar survey with Lund University and K2, a Swedish knowledge center for public transport, surveying Lime riders in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, asking about their travel preferences post-COVID. As you can see, existing riders plan to keep using scooters, and no one says that they're going to stop riding. Again, what is more interesting, while 60% will ride scooters with the same frequency as before, nearly 30% see themselves riding scooters more often. Now, combine this increased use of micromobility with the fact that 50% of all riders complement our services with public transit and 20 to 30% replace car trips, this is where the chance for cities lies post-COVID-19. And many European cities like Paris, Milan, London have embraced micromobility for exactly these reasons. We saw many cities investing in new bike infrastructure like pop-up bike lanes or open streets that benefit micromobility. And by the way, if you're a city and wonder if you should keep those pop-up bike lanes, please do. Our trip data shows that new bike lanes saw an increase in trips by 111%, while pre-existing bike lanes saw an increase of 49%. When we looked at ridership in Berlin, Paris, and London, citywide ridership was up 15% in June compared to February 2020, and the average distance on our scooters increased by 68%. The very last question you might now ask is, why bother? We have seen micromobility operators come and go, and it's true, until this year, going out to find a self-sustainable micromobility operator was as successful as finding Bigfoot. But we have reached a turning point in November 2020. Lime has become the first new mobility company to reach cash flow positive for a full quarter, and we are on track to be full year profitable in 2021. This is a validation that e-bikes, e-scooters, and other light electric vehicles aren't just a passing fad, but further a fundamental shift away from personal car use. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Fabian, for this very interesting presentation. And you'll also be back a little later after the next presentation. So I'll see you for much more questions in a little while. Because now I would like to introduce Jhon Alexander from Nextbike. Jhon is an industrial engineer and holds an MBA. He has over 6 years of experience in market strategy and business development in the urban mobility and textile sectors.
Hi, everyone.
And hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes. And in Nextbike, he works with cities, companies, public transport operators, and universities in order to create sustainability and fully integrated public bike sharing systems. So now, Jhon, the screen is yours and you can share your presentation. We don't see it yet. We still see you.
So let me just share my screen. I think that you can hear me now.
I can hear you and we can see your screen.
So perfect. We have heard a lot of information about how micromobility is changing the way we move in cities, especially in this COVID situation. And we're here to share our experience during the high peak of the pandemic. The strategy that Nextbike followed was a bit different. And it's very interesting to see that, basically. So in theory, and what we saw is most of other modes of transport, and we were talking about every mode of transport during the pandemic, of course, fell out of favor. Public transit, car sharing, bike sharing, scooters, most of focused private companies were really leaving cities and removing the services, of course, because of the pandemic. Nextbike as a company, we're at the moment in 200 cities in the world, and we're very focused in Europe, where we have a vast operations in many countries, such as Germany, Sweden, Poland, Czech Republic, Spain. And we were really considering what to do then, and how to deal with this situation. If either we just furlough all of our employees and we find a way to move forward, and we decided that that's not the way to do it. And thanks to the smart contracting that we have and the type of contracts that we have with the cities, and this collaborative approach of Nextbike, that really working close to cities, we didn't remove one single bike. And we were really thinking in reducing actually the labor that the employees that we had on the street operating the system, and we actually had to increase that, and you will see that. So what we started doing, we react very quickly to the pandemic. First, we adjust the structures for the operations. We really worked a lot in working from home office. Like 2 weeks it took us to reorganize the whole company. Then we really focused on the service and our people. And as soon as we managed that internally, we went to our partners, which are the cities, which is our contracted partners or our main partners, so to say, in the projects. And we found tailored approach in many different cities, all with the same sense. And thanks to the strategic partnership that we have with public transit, because in most of our contracts, bikes are very combined with the public transit systems on the tariff system and on the branding system, and the way the system is working or the partnership is working, it helps us to improve the system and also to complement public transit. And that's something what we did. So we really focus on the service, adjust all this, our team, and also the standards for keeping our users safe. We started communicating with the cities, and then we proposed some solutions, and we found that very, very interesting results. And here we check some of them. So Germany was one of the most interesting ones because we really reached agreement with more than 20 cities. And we create something called the Corona voucher, we call it internally. And basically, we found a way to promote bike sharing to complement public transit during the pandemic. So most of our systems were free of charge for the users that had the public transport ticket. And for instance, in Berlin and Augsburg or Leverkusen, we made new stations, we added different combinations, and this helped us actually to have more trips in some systems, or have the reduction of trips was very low in some other cities, even though we were in a whole lockdown. So we were the only provider in Germany that kept having operations during the whole pandemic, and actually increased the fleet and launched a couple of services and expanded the fleet as we did it in Augsburg, where we had 20% more of the bikes. The UK was also a very interesting one. The approach was very collaborative in general, and what we did there was a very similar approach. We reach out to different partners, sometimes our sponsor partners, sometimes the cities, and we agreed in a way to find free vouchers for either students or for NHL's employees to grant basically public transit access. And for instance, in Glasgow, we reached actually our highest rental, our peak rentals over the whole period of the contract. We started 2014, which was very interesting. We also expanded the system with some e-bikes, and now we're duplicating the number of e-bikes in the system as well. And Milton Keynes was a very specific case because we had to shut down the system. Our main contracting party in Milton Keynes is a sponsor and not the city. But after some discussions with the city, really trying to collaborate with them, we actually find a sort of lease scheme where we provided bikes also to the NHS workers for free, and they were somehow subsidized by the city vouchers. And this was a very interesting practice. Actually, at the moment, Glasgow is going to keep the system for free until spring 21. And we're having like highest rentals in our history in Glasgow. Some things happen also on the east. So in Slovakia, we had a very interesting case because the reaction of the cities was very negligent in terms of bikes. So they shut down the systems, that they really considered that bikes were not the right approach to move people during the lockdown. Checking on that, we actually made some adjustments, discussed with the city, and suggested our local partner, which is Arriva, and it looks like there was an agreement with the city to open up the system. And at the moment, the system is rather small. We have 100 bikes, but we have 30,000 rentals per month. And for such a small system, it's a very, very good result because it reaches around 10 rides per bike per day, which is tremendous result. So we've seen this in other systems as well, as for instance in Poland, by the government, all the systems were shut down, and it took us a while until the we were allowed to restart operations in Poland. So the approach from different governments was different, and some of them the direction from the politicians basically was really to promote bike sharing or cycling, and on the other side there were some of them that were really opposed to it, and yeah, it was interesting to manage. At the end, the result was that in all of the systems we end up with having more results, more rentals. Same happened like in Bilbao, for instance. We have the bike sharing scheme that is more highly used in Europe. We have 18 rentals per bike per day. It's a fully e-bike system. And at the beginning, the system was shut down for 1.5 months completely, because there was a political decision to not to promote cycling. But after discussions with the city as well and adjustments, we decided that the strategy was not the right approach. And we started again, and the system really started booming again. And we're actually now duplicating the fleet. So we used to have 450 e-bikes. And in January 2021, we will have 950. And same happened in Cycleta, which is the system we have in Las Palmas. That was the only system in Spain that never stopped operating, which is all very interesting, because all the capitals, let's say Barcelona and Madrid, they shut down the system for 1.5 months, more or less. But Cycleta was the only one that was really keeping it through and really using it as a public transit option. And therefore, also this year, there's an expansion of e-bike in the e-bike network of the system, which is also very interesting to see. And one of our most interesting cases is you realize, is it really worth to start launching systems during a pandemic? Well, this is our case in Czech Republic. So during the COVID, the peak basically of the pandemic, we started launching systems, and we started in 11 new cities with 2,600 bikes. And we reached 1 million new rentals, which was very, very impressive in a very short time. And of course, taking into account the conditions that we have in the system, which was in general very interesting to see the progress that. We also see some interesting notes. We started our first project in Latin America, in Mexico. And this one was very also interesting, because it was hard to start a system from Germany, but somehow we managed, and the market was really booming to it. And actually, another one that is not even more interesting is in Sweden. I think we all know that the strategy in Sweden across the pandemic was a bit different, and therefore in March, where we were really in the high peak of the pandemic, we were starting our system there with 1,700 bikes and 175 stations. So we were actually installing the system and implementing it, of course, taking into consideration all the measurements of the safety of our employees, but finding out a way to promote that. We just recently launched a system in Croatia, which is the biggest system in Croatia. Now we have 300 bikes, and 150 of them are e-bikes, thanks also to the booming of the rentals there. So the city realized to double down on budget and to increase the system, thanks to the good performance that was having it. So what do we have to say in terms of learning? We've seen that really bike sharing is an important element of the public transit. We see that when other modes of transport that were not that reliable as private companies, let's say, that were only focused on the rental revenue, it's hard to keep them operating if their business is not working. So a smart contracting, a smart business model has to be in place, so that you have a public system, a public service, basically. Also, then taking into consideration the tariff is very important for that. We consider bike share as individual public transport. And that's also very important, because if you really consider bike share as public transport and you see it as probably the cheapest way to move people around in a 5-kilometer radio, it really helps. With very little money, you can do a lot in terms of transit. Public subsidies in terms of public transport integration are very interesting, and I think we saw that also in Germany, especially, when most of our contracts follow this structure, which we have a partnership with the public transit, and basically their members, like the subscription holders of public transit, they have access to bike sharing under certain conditions. Sometimes it's 3 minutes, sometimes it's discounted tariff. And the most essential one, we saw really how cities change really quickly. I mean, we saw how a lot of decisions were taken that in the past were taken 3-4 months. Things were taken in a couple of weeks, and it was very interesting as well to see. And for us, the future really of the mobility is interesting, as smart public-private partnerships are essential for the development of cycling or public transit. Of course, all integrated with active mobility. I know that a lot of people are talking about e-bikes and e-scooters, which is also a very important part of the mode. But we cannot forget about the pedal bikes. The pedal bikes are active mobility, and they're actually the mean of transport that is probably the most affordable and the most healthy one, which is a very important one to highlight, to keep always in the loop. And I think that's it from my side. In case you have any questions, please feel free to share.
Yes, thank you very much, Jhon. And since you were the last of the speakers, I would like to invite everybody.
Is there any question?
Can you hear me, Jhon? Can you hear me, Jhon? Jhon? Can you hear me? I would like to invite everybody back to the stage so we can have all the questions. But if you can't hear me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And Jhon, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Good. Okay. Great to have you back. And thank you for the presentations. Fabian, I don't see you. You are there. Good. So thank you.
Should I start now? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you, but can you hear us, Jhon?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
What? Yes, Jhon, I don't think you can hear us. Please, you.
Okay, perfect.
No. I don't know.
Okay.
What.
Great. So in case.
Jhon, can you hear us? Maria, can you message Jhon?
Can I see any questions?
We will just have to continue. I'll have Maria, our assistant, message Jhon. Okay, so there has been a lively debate in the chat. So I will just take some questions from the chat and pose to you. And we will start with the first question actually for you, Jill. It says the ECF dashboard is impressive and very useful. Could the next step be a push for binding targets similar to Paris objective to build a bike lane for every street by 2024?
Mm-hmm. Well, wouldn't that be a dream, to have a bike lane in every street? Certainly, you know, we want to have clear targets, because clear targets means that, you know, you have something to work towards and lobby for, and, you know, the more of those you have, the better. You know, whether we need exactly that target for each street is probably up for debate, but certainly targets are important. Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you, Lauha, for the question.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot to mention that. It was okay. And then there has been some lively debate, and maybe we could take that from the chat to the stage, about sustainability of micromobility, especially e-scooters. And Fabian, you had some comments on that in the chat, where you also find some very useful links that Philippe Christ from ITF provided. But Fabian, maybe you can comment on the questions regarding sustainability of the vehicles themselves.
Yeah, I think the hardware innovation that we've seen in the industry is quite impressive. I don't actually know at which model we are right now. It's number 14 or 15 in just 3 years. And I think everything we've seen about e-scooters at the very beginning, that they fall apart after 30 days or 3 months. I mean, most of these models have never been launched in Europe. That was like the early days in the US. And if you look, for example, now at the scooter that we have in my region, which is Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, they have been operating for 19 months. So it's of course hard to tell how long they will last, but so far so good. And we're definitely far away from what people thought they would last.
Okay, thank you for that. There's also some questions in the chat about safety regarding, I think it must be especially related to e-scooters.
Yeah, I linked an article because we just did a major analysis in the US that basically concluded that 99.985% of all rides, if I'm not mistaken, do not have any incident, or that no incident was reported. And we're working on similar numbers for Germany. And I think what really struck me this year was, and I think it's probably the best indicator to show that these vehicles are safe, that the first German insurance companies reduced the premium for people who buy them themselves. So we started off last year and you paid, let's say, 50 euros per year for your insurance, because in Germany they have to have a number plate. It's categorized as a motorized vehicle. And all the prices dropped this year across the board, which means that the insurers saw, not many problems, hence we can make it cheaper. And so it's not me saying that, but probably an industry that only relies on data and nothing else.
Okay, that was any others who want to comment on the safety issue? Okay, then I would like to ask a question to all of you, because many of these micromobility what would you say, vehicles that are available in cities are privately operated. And how can we make sure that these are actually a resilient solution that are available in a time of crisis for people when they need them? What does it take for us as users to be sure that they are available every day when we get out of the door and need it? Any one of you want to? Do we have?
I think Laurent wants to answer, but he's on mute.
Okay.
No, I mean, at least in France and in most of the country in Europe, what we have seen was saved by Nextbike. Most of the company relying only on user revenue added trouble at the beginning, because I mean, during the true pandemic where everybody has to stay at home, obviously it was not possible to gain revenue from the usage, as there was no usages. So I mean, maintaining the fleet, maintaining the operation was very important, and all the project, or most of the project in France, were still on during the pandemic, so as to ensure that people could use the bicycle anytime, while most of the operators were paid for that and had to change their rule and the procedure that they were using and we were using ourselves to ensure that safety was secured. But having a public with a kind of public role in a long-term basis was a key issue, and in a long run as well. Most of the project of the bike sharing project we see in Europe are depending on public support, and this was very important. We were not sure. I mean, most of the free-floating company, for example, could not sustain. We had this very strange video conference with the operating staff saying in 1 hour, we are very sorry, but we have to reduce our cost and bye-bye. So many companies were like reducing their team due to only 1 month of stop in operation, which was obviously not the case of all the projects that were publicly sponsored subsidized for a long period of time. And I'm very happy to say that in Paris, for example, where the boom introduced, we also had our peak of usage during the COVID period. We reached 215,000 rides a day, which is like a maximum that we could have. And in comparison with the other mobility devices, and especially e-scooters or e-moped, we were very much higher. So our resilience to COVID was very good in bicycle in general, but basically because we had like good support coming from the cities.
Okay.
Perfect. I think I'm back now. I'm really sorry. I somehow couldn't hear you. I hope I can now.
We can hear you. Can you hear us? I think that was the problem before.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. Good, great. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
Jill, you have a response also?
Well, I think that, if the overall goal is simply to enable more and better cycling and also to enable this as an important mobility option during the pandemic or otherwise, then we have to have more and better options. And shared bike services certainly are one of those options. And I think any way that cities and municipalities can help support that to make sure that that option is available is the right thing to do.
So you're basically saying also partnerships, public-private partnerships can be necessary.
Absolutely. It should be part of the overall mobility concept, and in particular the sustainable mobility concept that needs to be supported and furthered that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how do we make private operated mobility options more available and more equitably distributed in our cities? Because when it's, also a business, there could be an idea to only operate where it's very popular and maybe not have the other areas of cities where it's actually needed, not covered. Any responses from Fabian? Or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on the regulations. If I look at cities where we have no caps, we gradually expanded to the outskirts. And if you take Berlin, for example, we have a much larger service area after 1.5 years than the locally subsidized bike sharing program. So we ourselves have an interest in making our service as available as it can get. And so this, of course, changes if you have a cap and or you introduce vehicle fees, etc., etc. The more difficult you make it for the operator, the harder it will get for us to expand even further in the outskirts.
Okay, I would like to comment on that because I think it's very interesting and we do have a lot of experience on that bit. On one side, what we do in most of our contracts is sell demand to public transit. And so, for instance, we make an agreement with a public transport operator, and maybe this agreement makes 40% of our income or 50% of our income. And this agreement is saying you need to provide public transit options to these specific target users in these specific areas. And those specific areas, you will need to have stations. And those stations will need to have certain service levels because it's a requirement for mobility. And though we are a private company and we also make money on the rental revenue, and we are looking, improving, in Berlin, we just expanded the fleet as well of the system on our own cost because it's part of our business model to cooperate with different companies. But the bit of providing this public service is impossible. A private company won't do it just by itself. It's not going to work, especially in mid-sized cities. You will never see let's say Lime or a company like that put in a bike sharing system in a 20,000 inhabitant city or 50,000. It's not going to work, or scooter sharing, because also it's not going to be enough density, it's not going to be enough demand, but they also need public transit. It's the same when you have a bus network. If the bus is not dense, of course, the line is not profitable, but it's the same for bike sharing and for other mobility options. If you see it as public transit, you can offer it everywhere.
So you're also basically saying public-private partnerships here around making sure distribution of micromobility options are equitable.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think we have to promote bike or e-scooter services as much as we can, and that's for sure. But with the development of the direct communication in all the mobility devices right now, it's true that IT companies can, and even independent IT company can provide for the city themselves very nice services that can pay more or less per trip or support per trip in some territories that are in terms of commercial usages quite low, because as you were mentioning, Jhon, too low densely populated, and no private company could anyway sustain for putting their vehicles there, where the sharing rates will be too low, and the operation cost anyway to maintain this fleet, to redistribute their fleet, will be too high. So the IT companies, and especially the mobility as a service companies, are working on nice ways of helping cities to have a kind of multi-operators system that could pay per trip. So it's what we call at CIE like smart subsidies or smart operating system, which are very promising for the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, we have an example of that in Leipzig. The mobility service platform is from the Public Transport Authority, and what they do is like they pay the trips. So we have an integration, and they can rent the bikes through their app. And they're basically, let's say the rate that we have is €1 per trip for half an hour, and they are charging the users 50 cents. And the difference is going to be paid to us. And there's like different options also with memberships and subscription models that also can work, and smart contracting, smart public-private partnerships are really the way to move forward.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question also from Philippe Chris from ITF around infrastructure, and I think it's primarily for you, Jill, that we have seen, connect and infrastructure quickly rolled out since March. In some cases, the infrastructure is high quality and connected, but in many instances, it's not. How quickly do you expect this infrastructure to be leveled up? And if not quickly, will we lose new riders?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Philippe, for that very good question. It is true of all of the measures that we've tracked that there's a huge variation in terms of, motivations, quality, etc. So, for example, some cities were able to very quickly roll out plans that they already had in the drawers for cycling infrastructure that maybe would have come only a few years later as part of a plan. And so they were able to put these temporary lanes in place. They knew exactly where to put them, etc. You had other cases where they were much more ad hoc to fit the situation. And, as a result, the amount of thinking that's gone into them, the quality of the infrastructure, etc., it varies widely. So, what does that mean? Obviously, we would want this temporary infrastructure to be turned into high quality, permanent infrastructure. That would be the lobbying goal, if you like. And the way that we're helping municipalities and other stakeholders to do this is to point the way in terms of how they might get funding, whether it's through the Recovery and Resilience Plan, making sure that the asks are in their national recovery plan, for example, or pointing to other ways that they might be able to, get funding and promote this. So that's part of trying to make sure that this becomes permanent. How quickly can that happen? Just as an example, what we know about the Recovery and Resilience Plan, there is a window, and it is a fairly short window by which time the money from those plans has to be spent. So that's why we think that building bike lanes is a perfect solution, because you can do that fairly quickly, especially if you already pointed the way with temporary infrastructure. And by the way, I would add that construction of bike lanes creates 30% more jobs than construction of conventional road infrastructure, so that it also has that economic boost in that sense. Are we in danger of losing new riders if we can't do this quickly enough? Of course, but I think, you know, we really need to seize the momentum here and make sure that we're saying, you know, we heard some statistics today, you know, how many more users, how many more riders, how can we promote that people want this, the demand is there. Here's the proof of that, and that's why, you know, we really need to build this infrastructure that contributes to this sustainable, lasting change that we all need and want. And it requires courage. I mean, we all know that too. Political will, funding, and courage, the courage to take space away from cars, because you can't do it without that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Political will and courage is much needed in this process.
Yeah.
You touched upon this big potential for new users, and you have also all mentioned that you're all data driven. And in the data, it shows that the majority of users of shared e-bikes and e-scooters are the younger men. But for instance, there is a huge potential in many cities to have more women cycling, you know, except like Denmark and the Netherlands, it's 1 to 3 women cycling in many cities. And women also have shown here in this crisis to be in the frontline workers that really needed public transport, because that's the primary mode for many women. How do you work with making sure that your product is actually relevant for women's needs and trip chaining modes with groceries and children? And do you work with that?
I mean, maybe I can take that as first respondent. I don't think, I mean, our product needs to be made more attractive to women. I think we need more attractive infrastructure. Men are more inclined to take risks than women. This finding has been replicated in a variety of studies over the years. And it's a very sad statement if you think about micromobility, because it means that women have a higher awareness of the risk when riding a scooter or bike in traffic. It's dangerous out there. Like, cars are dangerous. So I would say to increase the share of women, we need better and safer infrastructure. And this holds true for all our riders. Like, we do on a 6-month basis, like a global rider survey, and consistently around 65–70% tell us they would ride more scooters or bikes if the infrastructure would be safe or safer.
So for you, it comes down to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments to the gender issue here?
In our project, especially for Smooth, we don't have major difference in gender issue, I would say. We do have some cities where women are using a bit less our project, while but this is not a major problem. While you're speaking about carrying like goods or whatsoever, we usually have baskets in the bike sharing, and this fine for most of the people. Regarding children, that's much more complicated for bike share, because we cannot surely provide the security that the seat for a baby, for example, will be safe enough that all the trips, for example, to secure the baby behind the bicycle will be not vandalized or will be right. So I do not know any automatic bike share system that was able to maintain like babysit, for example. And this is not only a problem for women, but as well for men. I mean, I was cycling all my day life. I've got 3 children, and we were cycling. So some of the projects were providing like bicycle for kids, but this is a bit complex as well, because you cannot have in a bike sharing system like so many types of bicycle that is complicating very much distribution or maintenance. So the mixture of automatic bike share as we know them, like station-based or free-floating, and long-term renting system are very interesting, especially for less densely populated cities, where the cost of an automatic bike share is an issue. So mixing, I would say, different bike services is a very good option, like having automatic bike share, because this is for most of the trips the most efficient and the most convenient services, but as well mixing with other mode of renting, like long-term renting, which is nice. We have Veligo, for example, in Paris, which is complementing Velib in a low density populated area, but many mid-sized cities are loving very much like long-term sharing, and promoting as well like safe parking facilities, which is very important to secure your own bicycle, because for the public demand, the city officials are usually seeing on a long-term basis what will be the cost of the support that I'm providing for a single bike trip, whatever the bike trip is, automatic bike share, long-term bike share, or a trip of someone belonging, having his own bicycle. So I think mixing different bike services all together is something we tried very much in France and must be promoted in Europe.
True. I would like to add something to that, because I think some of the comments really rely on us. I would say we do have some systems with the children, like seats for the bikes, the automatic bike sharing schemes, especially in Poland and also in Croatia. And it was a challenge at the beginning, and it is a challenge to operate it also when you have like kids bikes, which we also have, like in Warsaw, we have around 100 bikes for kids, and they have certain specific conditions, and the use case is more really to leisure, focus on leisure, and not really in transportation. Is a bit different because the stations are located in parks. But we do see this as an opportunity to really pilot these things. We're also piloting the cargo bikes, which could be a use case also to bring the kids to school, and there are different alternatives to do that. Another thing that I would say, especially for retired people and elderly, is like they don't, in general, they don't have high income, and electric vehicles are rather expensive, to pay for a trip. 2-3 euros might be maybe too much for them for each trip. And for instance, in Bilbao is a very interesting case because the tariff is so heavily subsidized. So you pay only 20 euros membership a year, and then you can have access to the e-bike system, which is for free. It's very, very attractive. We have around 25% of people that are over 65. And that's really a lot to say. A lot of like retired people that don't have enough budget to use public transit, even because it's more expensive to pay a single trip or the monthly or annual membership for the public transit than to pay for your e-bike annual membership, which is only 20 euros. So there are options there also to adjust. I think most of the vehicles are able to serve women and in terms of the technology, but it's more the way you act and relate to them also.
Thank you. Jill, you have a comment on gender and cycling? Oh, you're on mute.
About that. Yes, yeah, there's a comment I'd like to make. A few months ago, a study was released. I think it was done by the VUB University here in Brussels, where bikes were sharing the street with cars. They noticed that if it was a female cyclist or even a male cyclist with long hair so that it kind of looked like a female, the cars that passed them gave them more space and were more, and passed them more slowly, meaning that they gave the perceived women a bit more space on the road than they gave to the men, which was a very, very interesting finding, which may help a bit with the perceived security of cycling that women have. But that doesn't take away from the point that was made very well, I think, by Fabian earlier, that it is about the infrastructure, because people need to feel safe in order to have cycling as their mode of daily commute or whatever. If they don't feel safe doing it, frankly, they're not going to do it for very long. So it is about the protected and separated and safe infrastructure if we really want to get those numbers up to where they need to be to achieve the sustainability goals and the public health goals and all the other benefits that we want to realize from cycling.
Yes, definitely a mix of everything that has been touched upon here: infrastructure, availability of different types of bikes, But also I think we need to work with the perception of what a cyclist is, because in many cities and countries, a cyclist is a male on a specific type of bike, wearing specific types of clothes. And at least when you ask in different countries, many women don't see themselves doing that. So I think also we need to work with the image and the promotion of cycling as being for everyone and as an activity that women can do. I've seen surveys, for instance, in Ireland, where teenage girls are saying cycling is for boys. It's not something for girls, and we cannot do it in our school uniform skirt. So we need also to work on that perception. Okay. Any more questions? Oh, I've seen in the chat, there has been also some mentioning about walking, and that because this is about active transportation in this session, and we haven't talked about walking. And of course, walking is an important part of that. How do you see, of course, walking and cycling and e-scooting kind of combined?
Can I start with that one? So
yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think in our tracker, some of the measures that our tracker has tracked include, slow streets and reduced speed and things that also benefit pedestrians. Car-free streets, those kind of things, and certainly that's part of the active mobility mix. And in the chat, the open letter that's referred to, that we teamed up with 16 other organizations to send yesterday to Commission Vice President Timmermans and DG Move Commissioner Valian, said that we really want to have active mobility and public transport as the cornerstones of transport in EU Green Deal and in the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. Just having technology for technology's sake or a focus on electric vehicles simply will not get us there. And so we have to have these, modal targets at the forefront to make sure that, we can really achieve the lasting change that we need.
Yeah, I think one very important aspect is that the length strip that bicycle shared are doing are very precisely measured, and we are usually above 3 kilometers for sure. And this kind of distance is not exactly the pedestrian distance. So we are in most of the cases sure that bicycle or bike sharing by itself is not taking part of walking. And we push very much for a pedal bike, push bike, because else positive externality of bike share is very, very important. It's the major one. Although we're pushing for e-bikes, we see that e-bikes is extending a bit the trip distance, but it's above all extending very much the usage frequency, meaning to say that someone using an e-bike will use it more often, but will not automatically do a longer trip, because anyway, the position of his home and the office, for example, has not changed. So we see in Paris where we have the top one number of e-bike in operation, which is more than 8,000 e-bike over, I would say, 15,000 push bike. So the ratio between the two is 20 to 30% longer trip for e-bike. But most of all, the search for an e-bike first. So most of the people are looking for an e-bike first because easier to and faster to use. So we not feel on our side that traditional bike share is taking a lot of walking instead of. I think that the situation, but maybe Fabian will speak about that, the situation for e-scooters is a bit different because the trip duration and because of the cost of the trip is much higher. Competition with walking can be higher, and at the same time, e-scooter sharing a very active mode in comparison with bicycle and even e-bikes where you are still pedaling? So this will be a question for you, Fabian.
Yeah,
Definitely.
no, I just looked up the numbers. So I think since COVID, we went up to 2.5 kilometers on average distance on a scooter. And the e-bikes that we took over this summer, we have a 31% longer distance on the e-bikes that we have launched in several cities over the summer. And to get back to your question, what I find really sad in all the conversations I have with policymakers in cities, somehow, I don't know who it is, let's say the car industry somehow managed to play us off against each other. Like it's about, hey, take these bikes from my sidewalk, take these scooters from my sidewalk. Though we all know we have to take space away from cars. So we've finally piloted in Berlin, like 20 car parking spaces were transformed into micromobility car parking spaces. We aimed for around 1,500, like Paris did. But again, we're back to the question of courage. And so far, if there's no courage on the side of the cities to take away that space from cars, then we keep discussing or fighting between us for this little space on the sidewalk or this little space here and there where we can put our vehicles. And I think that's very sad, and it's really something that has to change over the next couple of weeks, months, and years for sure.
True. If you don't mind, I also would like to add a little bit about that. I think the in general bike and walking is very complementing each other. If you consider a bike sharing system station-based on the one side, you have a radio of, let's say, 5 minutes walking, that the people would really willing to walk that far to pick up a bike and to make the trip. 3 to 5 minutes is the average that we have. And also on the other way, when you have a free float system, then it's a bit harder because the density is not, unless you have a lot of vehicles, then in order to reach one vehicle, it would be harder in less density areas. So our ideal system, and this is something we are working on with different cities and piloting, is in the city centers and the dense areas will be covered. And if they are flat, of course, if you have a city that is very hilly, then the e-bikes or the electric vehicles are for sure the solution. But in the flat areas and dense, high density areas, you should go for pedal bikes because they're the most affordable way to move around. And it will really promote an easy access to the system. And in the outskirts of the city, you can put stations for charging stations for the e-bikes, and that will really promote long trips with the e-bikes. So we have some systems that are combined. Let's say 30% e-bikes is on 70% pedal bikes, and the e-bikes are really doing this role, either going uphill or going up the outskirts of the city. And then that way, maybe you can combine all things together, of course, with walking, which is one of our main combination modes together with public transit.
Yeah. And thank you all for that. Just the last question. Is e-scooters active mobility? I get that question a lot, so I'm asking you.
For me, it actually doesn't matter to this point if it's active or inactive. I would just say what is most important is what does it do? And if it replaces car trips, then that's what we want. And if you look at what we call Umweltverbund in Germany, which is everything, public transit, bike, walking, this is where I see it. I mean, the main purpose of all three, and I hope by the time we will add a fourth pillar, then it's all about an alternative to private car use. And that's basically all I care about. And to be very frank, I mean, we have seen bikes for 200 years. So we have seen it. I mean, normally all the trips we do, right, under 5 kilometers, we can do them by bike. I do it myself. But still, you look outside the window and the message hasn't been heard. And so for me, e-scooters is like the starter drug, the getaway drug. You need to offer something new. And what's really interesting is now that we have e-bikes, we see that people start with the e-scooters. And then we have a huge crossover to people, oh, they also have e-bikes in their app. Well, I'm going to try that. Ooh, guess what? I love e-bikes. And I mean, we see that in the sales everywhere. And it's especially like, if you look at who buys e-bikes today for private, I mean, these people are rather older, have more money. They definitely have a car in front of their house or wherever they live. So again, I think it's by offering more alternatives to private cars that we reach the final goal. And so that, yeah.
I think that's a very good point to end with. Our time is up. Thank you all very much for your presentations and for joining this interesting Q&A. Thank you to the audience for your comments and questions in the chat. I hope that you all learned a little bit here or was entertained. So thank you all for joining, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.